Mesdames les ministres, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général,
Dear Ministers,
Mesdames, Messieurs,
Secretary General, ladies and
chers
gentlemen,
amis, chers collègues,
dear friends, dear colleagues,
donc mon nom est Jean Jouzel, je suis chercheur
I'm
dans le domaine
Jean
de l'évolution
Jouzel.
du
I'm
climat
a
et
researcher, I'm a
c'est vraiment
climatologist
un très grand plaisir
specializing in climate
d'ouvrir,
change.
disons, cette conférence
It is a
scientifique
pleasure
of
to
common
open this
future in the
scientific
climate change,
conference, our common future
sous le
under
haut
climate
patronage
change, under
du
the
président de la
high
République.
patronage of the President of
Comme
the
il y aura-
French
enfin,
Republic.
Cette initiative, en fait, a été prise il y a à peu près 2 ans.
We decided to
Treu,
organize this
dira
conference
un
about
peu
2
comment nous
years
avons
ago, and my
procédé.
colleague Hervé de Treu
Et,
will say a few more
disons,
words
nous
about
sommes
that.
organisés autour de 3 comités. Un comité scientifique
There are 3
présidé
committees
par
for this
notre collègue
conference, a
américain Chris
scientific
Field,
committee organized by my
comité
colleague Chris
d'organisation,
Field
donc,
from the
Hervé Le Treu,
US,
ici
the
présent,
organizing committee
préside, avec,
chaired
en son
by
sein, un
Hervé Le
secrétaire général
Treu,
sous la responsabilité
with
de
the
Claire Veil, et,
General
moi-même, je suis,
Secretariat under the
chargé de
aegis
ce
of
qu'on appelle
Claire
le haut
Veil,
comité.
and I
Alors, le
personally am
premier rôle du haut
responsible
comité,
for the high-level
effectivement, de
board.
trouver des soutiens,
The responsibility of the high-level board was initially
l'organisation, et
to
je
find
tiens vraiment à remercier, vous voyez,
support and to organize.
toutes les, disons, je ne citerai pas beaucoup d'organisations internationales.
I'm not going to
Or,
mention all of the
nous avons
international
le patronage
organizations
de
that
4
supported
ministères
us.
et
We
je
are
remercie
under the
Madame Royale,
patronage of
Madame Vallaud-Belkacem
5
d'être là,
ministries, and I would like
au
to
nom de leur
thank
ministère,
Mrs. Ségolène Royal and
dire
Najat
quelques mots tout à
Vallaud-Belkacem for
l'heure.
being here on
Nous avons
behalf of
également
their
le ministère de
ministries.
l'Agriculture, de
We also
l'Alimentation, de la
have
Pêche
the
et de la Ruralité,
Minister
ainsi
of
que
Agriculture,
que le ministère des Affaires étrangères et du Développement
as well as
international.
the Minister
Voilà, je ne citerai
of
pas toutes
Foreign Affairs and
les
International
organisations françaises,
Development. I
organismes
won't
français
mention
qui nous ont
all of the
soutenus
French
très
organizations who
fortement
brought us
avec ces
their
ministères, et je
support
tiens à les
through their
remercier.
ministries, but I would
Un
like
petit mot
to
pour
thank
disons,
them
toutes les
profusely.
organisations
I'll
internationales,
say a few words about
Future
the
Earth, ICSU,
international
bien sûr
organizations,
l'UNESCO,
Future
mais
Earth,
je donnerai la parole à Laura Schlegel tout à l'heure.
ICSU, UNESCO, of course,
On parle
but
aussi
Flavia
des
Schlegel
Nations
will
Unies,
speak
de
later.
l'Organisation Météorologique Mondiale,
The UN, the
et puis
World
aussi des
Meteorological
organisations
Organization,
internationales
as well
qui ont
as
plus
international
particulièrement, et c'est très important pour
organizations,
nous, aidé à la
which, and
participation
this is
de
particularly
chercheurs du
important
Sud.
for us,
Voilà, donc,
helped researchers
merci beaucoup.
from the
Et,
Global South to take part
donc je
in
vais
this
donner la parole
conference.
à mon collègue Hervé Le Treu,
I will
en
start
charge
by giving the
du
floor
comité
to
d'organisation.
Hervé Le Treu, who is responsible of the organizing committee.
Mesdames les ministres, chers collègues, c'est
Dear ministers, dear colleagues,
d'émotion après tous ces moments de préparation.
after all the hard work preparing this conference, I'm rather moved to be taking the floor here
Une centaine de pays.
in front of
Alors, je le fais
participants from over
nom d'un comité
100 countries.
d'organisation
I'm speaking
initié
here
cette
on behalf
entreprise, comme
of
Jean l'a dit,
an organizing committee
maintenant un peu plus
which
d'1 an.
launched this initiative
Peut-être je voudrais retracer
over a
ce qui
year
a été
ago.
l'ambition de ce
And I will
groupe
talk about
et
the
la manière
ambitions
dont on a essayé de
of this
structurer
group
cette
and about the way in
conférence,
which we try to structure this
avec,
conference
les objectifs scientifiques qui la sous-tendent. Alors,
and
on peut dire
about
qu'il y
its
a un peu
underlying
plus d'1 an,
scientific
le
objectives.
petit
Now,
groupe des-
over a
ce qu'on
year
appelle des
ago,
initiateurs de cette conférence
the group of those
était
who
composé
initiated this
d'à peine
conference,
une dizaine de personnes,
which was made up of
avec
roughly
des
10
représentants de
people,
sciences très,
with
très
representatives
différentes,
from
sciences dures,
different types of sciences,
il y avait
hard
Jouzel,
sciences,
moi-même, les sciences du vivant,
Jean Jouzel and
l'agriculture, le
myself,
développement,
life
pour les différents
sciences,
noms,
agricultural sciences,
Jean-François Sousana,
Benoît
des
Martin,
sciences économiques,
people
Franck
from
Lecoq, Jean-Charles Ourcade, des sciences
economic
politiques, sociales,
sciences, political and
Sébastien
social
Trayer,
sciences, such as
Claire Veil,
Sébastien
secrétaire général de la
Trayer, Claire
conférence,
Veil,
que
who's the
j'ai déjà
Secretary
cité,
General of the
et Laurence
conference,
Toubiana, qui a
and
été peut-être
Laurence
la première à avoir
Toubiana,
l'idée de cette conférence, mais qui a
who
été
was
appelée
maybe the
depuis la
first to
plus haute fonction,
come up with the
puisqu'elle
idea
est
of this
responsable de
conference,
la
but
négociation climat
she's
en
now
France.
responsible for the
Et puis,
climate
on avait une
negotiations on
personne,
behalf of
Catherine
France.
Michaud, qui est peut-être
We also
ici,
had Catherine
qui est,
Michaud, who
était
might be
responsable de
here
la
today, who was
logistique. Donc, c'est une
responsible for
toute petite équipe.
logistics. So a very small,
Et
close-knit
la
team.
conférence, dans ses objectifs, dans ses ambitions, a grandi vraiment au-delà de nos espérances.
And so the ambitions of the
Et
conference
parfois, on peut le dire
grew
aussi, au-delà des
beyond
moyens
our
dont on
greatest
disposait,
hopes
on a
and
été
also
obligé de
beyond
s'ajuster
the
à la
means that were at our
conférence dont les ambitions
disposal.
grandissent.
So we had to adjust
crois
as
que cette,
the ambitions grew.
La taille de cette conférence, son ambition,
The scope of this
traduit
conference and its ambitions
besoin très fort de ce
show that there is a real need for cross-disciplinary conferences of this kind. And it was made possible thanks to the support of all the national institutions, which Jean has just mentioned, international organizations such as ICSU and UNESCO. And Michel Jarraud will say a few more words about that later on. And what really changed the dimension of this conference was the arrival of Chris Field, who's the head of the IPCC. He decided to preside an international committee, so we would really like to thank Chris Field profusely once again, because he played a key role. He played a key role in the way in which this conference was designed, scientifically speaking, in terms of the way we distributed roles, the disciplines that we dealt with, and the stakes involved as well.
Cette conférence joue un rôle fort aussi à mi-chemin entre les deux COP 20 et 21.
This conference comes halfway between the two UNFCCC conferences of parties. And so what we want to say through this conference, we wanted to show that science played a major role in this process, and it is thanks to scientific knowledge that we will be able to tackle climate change. Throughout the years, we've moved from an issue where the scientific community was there to ring alarm bells, and so the science that we developed was really to warn people with all the debates that surrounded it and that you're well aware of. And we've come to a stage where we've come so close to the crunch that the process of global warming has to be stopped as quickly as possible. Now, climate is no longer a factor that can be dealt with in isolation. It has to be dealt with together with a number of other factors that can have an impact on development. Other environmental factors such as biodiversity, pollution, and social issues as well as geopolitical issues. Now, there's one question that we were asked time and again about this conference, is whether we need another conference yet again, whether the IPCC reports were not enough by themselves. Now, it's obvious that this conference is going to be heavily based on the assessment reports of the IPCC. The IPCC is the first initiating force behind the climate negotiations. And everything that will happen from there on derives from choices that are informed by the work of the IPCC. Yet I think that there is enough room for additional measures. The IPCC has a very stringent positioning, very scientifically accurate, and derives a lot of authority from there. And between science and political decision-making, I think there is room for more action. And it's important to position the knowledge that we have at our disposal within a given context from a prospective point of view to see what is to come and to look for answers, to look for solutions that might be broader and more cross-disciplinary. So this is what we've tried to do with this conference. And so we've elaborated a program which is multifaceted. There's a scientific conference, there's a sort of off festival with side events. And so I will say a few more words about all these side events that are not going to be scientific necessarily. Now, as for the scientific conference, we have chosen to combine two different approaches. One of them involves plenaries. And this is something that where we've supported the work of Chris Field as much as possible. Chris Field coordinated this part of the conference, and we'd really like to thank him for the patience with which he put up with the complexity of dealing with a French organization. Now, the other part of the conference, which is something that we've done quite innocently, was to call upon the entire community to have as much diversity as possible through a call for scientific sessions. Now, 460 sessions were submitted. We were quite overwhelmed, and 420 of them were considered to be of good quality. So we've decided to organize the conference slightly differently. We've regrouped all these different sessions. We've opened a second site at the Pierre-Marie Curie University. This was quite a complex process because we didn't really have any previous examples of such a type of conference, but we're very proud of the fact that this conference is held at UNESCO, an international organization, and at the Pierre-Marie Curie University, which will welcome you on the 9th of July and at the University of Jouzel. Now, we're very proud of the conference and how it's been organized. The idea is to go from a diagnosis to solutions, to answers. This does not mean going from fundamental research to applied research. Fundamental research is essential in the process, and it's also part and parcel of finding the solutions. And we hope that those solutions will come into play in the COP21 negotiations that take place in December. So we hope that this conference is going to enable us to build more contacts, and I'd really like to thank you for your participation.
Merci beaucoup, Hervé, et merci pour...
Thank you, Hervé. Thank you for all the work you've done. As Hervé briefly mentioned, the second duty of the high-level board chair is to promote and support the side events, and these should not be confused with the parallel sessions, and this has been a great success. And here I would like to give special thanks to everyone who's involved. Now we've got very wide-ranging subjects. We've got social issues, young people are involved, we have artists in areas such as energy, innovation, the forests, and there are things on the Paris Agreement, what it should be, the regional policies, and people who are interested in oceans really rallied too and did a great deal of work. And you will see this in the course of the conference. Farming too, you can see we've got a very wide range of subjects there. And of course, it's not completely over. It goes on from the till the 15th of July. There are 75 events that have been organized around the world, 52 in Europe, a large number in France, or some 2/3 and there are also some foreign ones. For example, there's a Costa Rica event organized by the World Bank, and there's a business school on online learning. There's the Latin American Youth Summit on climate change in Mexico. In Bangkok, there's a regional forum on climate change in Thailand. And there was something on farming and forests too in Western Africa. And so you can see all these issues have been dealt with. That was in Abidjan in Africa. So I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in this. This is all part of the conference and it's very important. So we shall continue with our program today. We're here at UNESCO, and I would like to thank the Director General, Ms. Bokova, for welcoming us here and hosting the event here. It certainly made it easy. And I'd like to thank Jean Chambaz for hosting us at the University of Paris, Pierre-Marie Curie at Jussieu. And I would like to introduce Flavia Shetty, who's Assistant Director General for Science here at UNESCO, who will now take the floor.
Mesdames les ministres, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, Monsieur les Présidents,
Ministers, Secretary General, Chairpersons, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
Pleasure to welcome you to UNESCO today on behalf of the Director General Irina Bokova. The Director General very much regrets not being able to be here due to imperatives asking for her presence abroad earlier than foreseen. With a few moments to go before the world takes part in the climate change negotiations at COP21 here in Paris, this international scientific conference, Our Common Future Under Climate Change, is extremely important and timely. Only an ambitious agreement on reducing CO2 emissions will move the world in the right direction of sustainable development. To succeed, we need to build on 3 pillars. First, we need a bold political vision as embodied by the one put forward by France. Second, we need to bring together all partners to make sure we craft an inclusive process. And third, we need a strong knowledge base to ensure that political decisions build on sound understanding of climate change. And this is precisely the role of UNESCO as the United Nations specialized agency for science. We stand ready to bring to the debate all the expertise and knowledge of our international programs for the sciences. The Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and the Ocean and Climate Platform informing COP21-related debates on the vital interaction between climate and ocean. The International Hydrological Programme raising awareness on the risks related to the changes in water resources. The Groundwater Resources Assessment under the Pressures of Humanity and Climate Change Network. The UNESCO-designated biosphere reserves and the UNESCO-supported global geoparks. We need more integrated science, building on all disciplines, including the social and human sciences, including indigenous knowledge. Indigenous people have long and multi-general histories of interaction with their environments that include coping with uncertainty and variability. Sami reindeer herders of northern Norway, for example, have developed a terminology pooling their knowledge of interactions between vegetation, snow, ice, and wind. They are on the front line of climate change, and they can see and they live it every day, how it influences the way they live, eat, and hunt. All this provides a wealth of knowledge to raise awareness in the general public and to strengthen the political commitment of the world leaders. Indeed, it is not enough to bring together all sciences. We need to share it with all citizens and all politicians, and this is not an easy task. Our future depends on the linkages we build between science and policy. It depends on the relation we build between science and society. And this is why the UN Secretary General has created the Scientific Advisory Board, led by UNESCO, to strengthen the science policy interface and make sure political decisions are fully informed by scientific research. This is why UNESCO hosted the Business Climate Summit to mobilize the private sector for the financing of the climate action with the presence of President François Hollande and more than 2,000 business leaders. This is also why we will organize UNESCO's 9th Youth Forum on the theme of Global Citizenship Youth for a Sustainable Planet, just weeks before the COP21. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le dérèglement climatique est bien davantage...
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is more than just a scientific and technical challenge. It is a human challenge, a social challenge, an ethical challenge, and it must be based on scientific study and thought. UNESCO was founded on the basis of the idea that sustainable peace could be built first in the minds of men and women through education, culture, and behavior. To a great extent, this vision also applies to sustainable development which requires a revolutionary change to behavior patterns, and this will start through the education of younger generations. UNESCO is in an excellent position with worldwide work on education for sustainable development, and this has been involved in school curricula, and I would like to applaud the efforts that France has made in this area. We have online distribution of UNESCO training for secondary teachers on education on climate change for sustainable development. We are working together with the French Agency for Media Cooperation to help train African journalists on these issues, and we are doing this by publishing a guide on climate change. These journalists will now be able to use their knowledge and raise awareness of African authorities on work which is being done at this scientific conference here today and also by the COP21 conference. I'm also thinking of ethical issues raised by climate change and the work done by our Global Commission on Ethics for Scientific Knowledge. Our commission identified 10 basic principles which form the basis for a declaration of the ethical principles on climate change and which we'll be discussing at the next general conference here at UNESCO. Today's scientific conference must be an opportunity for us to provide input for all these thoughts and discussions and give even greater weight, greater ambition to our work so that we can issue warnings, raise awareness, and educate people all the way through to the COP21 conference. This conference is a new sign of the complete commitment of UNESCO to the success of the conference, the COP21 conference, which it has been carrying out for long months and which it will do until the month of December. I would like to thank the chairperson and the team responsible for organizing this conference, and I would like to thank you too, the participants here today, and I would urge you to maintain your commitment. I wish you all a very fruitful conference, and I thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup.
Many thanks for this warm welcome. I'm now delighted to welcome Michel Jarraud, whose responsibility is twofold. He's Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization and will speak as such. And I would like to say how important the WMO is due to its work, but also through the World Research Programme on the climate, which is particularly important in the field of research. And there's another role for which the WMO is particularly important, is because the environmental part of the UN, UNEP, within which he's responsible for the IPCC, and Jouzel will say a few words at the end of this opening ceremony, but I would like to thank you for your support of the IPCC, because it is very much thanks to its sponsors, I would say, that IPCC can do its task. Now, the second thing you will have to do is to say a few words on behalf of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Mesdames les ministres, Madame la sous-directrice générale de l'UNESCO,
Excellencies,
Hervé le Treu, cher Jean
ADG for UNESCO, dear Jean Le Treu, dear Jean Jouzel, Excellencies, dear friends, dear colleagues. Before I start talking about the ideas of the World Meteorological Organizations, I will say a few words in English because the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, wanted to share his thoughts with you on this occasion. So he's asked me to read his statement, which I will do now with great pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to send greetings to the International Scientific Conference on Our Common Future under Climate Change. I wish to thank the organizers, the International Council for Science, Future Earth, UNESCO, and major French research institutions, as well as the French government, for its support to its very important event. This year, world leaders have an historic opportunity to adopt a new sustainable development agenda and to reach a global agreement on climate change. Both will have enormous consequences for this and future generations. This conference could not be more timely. The scientific community has a major role to play in shaping our future. Science provides us with a signpost of where we are and where we are heading. According to the fifth assessment report of the IPCC, land and ocean surface temperatures have increased globally by nearly 1 degree Celsius since 1901. And in parts of Africa, Asia, North America and South America, surface temperatures have risen by up to 2.5 degrees. At the United Nations climate talks in 2010, governments committed to a maximum temperature rise of 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. However, the IPCC tells us that we are heading towards average global warmings of 5 to 6 degrees if nothing is done. The world is at a critical crossroads. Countries have been invited to submit their intended nationally determined contribution, INDC, to the new climate agreement to be concluded in December here in Paris. More than 40 developed and developing nations, representing with slightly over half of the global emissions, have already submitted targets. Some countries have committed up to 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. All countries must be part of the solution. In November, the UNFCCC will release a report on the aggregate effect of INDC submissions. However, it is already clear that current INDCs will not be sufficient to meet the 2-degree target. Clearly, strong action still needs to be taken. The emissions gap, the difference between emission reductions pledged by parties to the UNFCCC and what is needed to stay within 2 degrees has been increasing. So, too, has the adaptation gap. The difference between funding and capacity needed and what has been committed. To bridge these gaps, it is critical to fill holes in funding, in knowledge, in technology, in capacity, and in trust. Science can help fill the gaps in knowledge and technology. I look forward to my scientific advisory board, facilitated by UNESCO, to also provide inputs on this topic to help me and the United Nations system to provide coherent support to member states on climate change. This conference will examine transformative solutions to climate change, from initiatives in the energy sectors to ecosystem adaptation and the green economy. I commend your leadership and support in building a more resilient and sustainable future. Thank you very much. End of quote of the Secretary General. Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the World Meteorological Organization, I wish to express my appreciation to the organizers of this conference. This is the largest scientific gathering before the COP21. This is an event that will certainly contribute to incorporate the role of climate science and information in the broader context of the changes that characterize our times, and in particular of sustainable development. The impact of climate change will be with us for a long time, and I am convinced that this conference will provide ample opportunities to review and discuss different approaches and measures to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And this is an opportunity to offer some perspectives from WMO. First of all, I would like to say that WMO is delighted to support this conference as a sponsor. With financial contribution to facilitate the participation of scientists from developing countries, it's also a pleasure to be here at UNESCO. WMO and UNESCO have worked very closely for decades to bring science at the forefront of the Sustainable Development Agenda. And I wish to thank Irina Bokova for the excellent cooperation on this critical subject. The science is speaking with a clear voice. The assessments of the IPCC and the reports of the WMO and other organizations confirm that climate change is unavoidable and that it is extremely likely due to human activities and constantly rising man-made greenhouse gas emissions. Temperatures are increasing, water cycle is being altered, ice and snow melting, sea levels are rising, oceans are warming and becoming more acidic, extreme weather events like heat waves are becoming more frequent and more intense, and it is the poor and the vulnerable that are paying the highest price. Preserving our climate as a common good is becoming increasingly urgent. We still have a choice, but time is running out fast, and it is critical that we act, that we take action to contain the worst impact of climate change. Sound scientific information is available to support decisions towards more sustainable patterns of production and consumption and effective adaptation to climate change. However, the response must be timely and resolute. Climate knowledge, the climate knowledge that's been built in the last decades, is an invaluable resource, and it is a prerequisite for decision-making and for climate action. Science gives us high confidence that we can still change course and mitigate climate change to a manageable level. Climate knowledge can and must support this process, help decision makers at all levels to make the right decisions. Climate knowledge, however, must come in a form that is easily understood and applied by those who need it. But there are, however, some prerequisites. First of all, it is important to strengthen or rehabilitate climate observations and related infrastructure. Sound and reliable data from observations are critical to decision-making. The Global Climate Observing System and the Global Ocean Observing System and the integration of different systems in the WMO Integrated Global Observing System remain the backbone for the provision of data. In addition, it's necessary to refine climate change scenarios and the downscaling to the regional and sub-regional scale in support of long-term planning. This is being addressed through a number of international projects under the umbrella of the World Climate Research Programme, co-sponsored by WMO, the International Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, and the International Council for Science, ICSU. WMO is also supporting regional climate outlook forums in almost all regions of the world. Thanks to the cooperation of Centres of Excellence recognized as WMO Regional Climate Centres, these forums are providing real-time regional climate outlook products on sub-seasonal to seasonal timescales that are essential to the development of climate services. National and regional climate services will build on seamless, integrated modelling systems to exploit historical knowledge and to provide well-grounded options for various sectors and communities. The research is to come up with options, and within the World Climate Research Programme and the World Weather Research Programme, those two research communities are working together to advance Earth system modelling and its applications for which climate systems are going to play an essential role. The Global Framework for Climate Services, GFCS, is an initiative of the United Nations system led by WMO, with the participation of several other UN and international organizations, including UNESCO. It was designed with precisely this purpose in mind, to facilitate the provision of climate information in a way that the right decisions can be made. This is a crucial challenge for both developing and developed countries, and there is great benefit in learning from each other. Climate products and services are assisting city planners in developing policies and action plans that can strengthen urban resilience in the face of natural disasters. And public health authorities are using climate forecasts to estimate and respond to the possible health consequences of extremes such as droughts, heat waves, and floods. Thanks to predictions about temperatures and rain trends, farmers are making better planting, cropping, and marketing decisions. Water resource managers use climate information to optimize water supply and flood management. Finally, I wish to underline the growing interest and concern in climate or geoengineering as a potential means for limiting climate change. Climate engineering technologies are of many different types, each with a different level of complexity, uncertainty, and associated risk. There could be unintended consequences associated with large-scale climate engineering, and the potential of these technologies should not be seen as a reason to lessen efforts to address man-made climate change. Now, before any action is contemplated, it is important to strengthen efforts to clarify and better understand the potential implications and risks of such technologies. We mustn't play sorcerer's apprentice. Now, in conclusion, I wish to reiterate that WMO stands ready to support and facilitate the sharing and application of climate knowledge for a strong climate action to minimize climate risks and contribute to sustainable development. Thank you. I'd like to thank Michel Jarraud on behalf of the WMO and on behalf of the United Nations. And I will now invite the Minister of Education, Higher Education and Research, Mrs. Najat Vallaud-Belkacem, who's interested in everything pertaining to this area as well as education. So I'd really like to thank you for the support you've brought to our disciplines in terms of research and teaching as well.
Merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Minister, dear Ségolène, ADG UNESCO, Deputy Secretary General, dear Jean Jouzel, dear Hervé, Treu, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I know you're expecting to hear the President of the Republic this morning, but unfortunately he can't be with us. The political climate in Europe at the moment is a bit like the other forms of climate. You have to keep track of all the changes, and the temperature certainly went up a bit in Europe last Sunday, and François Hollande, along with all the other European leaders, is very busy working on finding a solution with his partners. He has asked me as Minister of Education, Higher Education and Research, and my colleague Ségolène, who's Minister for the Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy, to speak. And I would like to say it's a great pleasure for me to speak here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, just a few years ago, the human race had to face up to a new responsibility. Previously, humans realized that they had to find peace through goodwill. This was politics, diplomacy, human rights, and sometimes there was war when the only solution for some could be found in weapons. But we have seen since the Age of Enlightenment that the wealth of nations comes from action and science. And the human race realized that the sharing of human wealth is not a random matter, nor does it depend on any higher authorities or higher bodies that can decide that some will be wealthy and others poor. And one day humans stopped and thought about the effect of its industrial activity on its health. And in the 20th century, we saw the effects of choices and lifestyles that had been made. And these were no longer just fatalities. Today, as we are moving into a new millennium, we can see that we are up against the forces of nature. And there is also the question of movements of the sky, the earth, the air, the oceans, the seas, and climates, and so on. And this is the time we're going through at the moment, a time of change, and we are all aware of it. We are all aware of ecology, and this is a new stage in human history, and you cannot separate it from group choices, collective choices that must be made, and this gives us greater responsibility. It gives us a different responsibility, and for all of us. Now, with this ecological awareness, or more specifically climate awareness, humans are up against a great responsibility to the world and the future, perhaps greater than ever before, because it's not just the human race today, but the entire human race, and the future will depend on choices that we make, and choices that we make in a few months' time at the COP21 conference. If we don't act in the future, we can be fairly sure that conflicts will arise in different parts of the world because there will be a shortage of vital resources as caused by global warming and climate change. And perhaps that future is closer than we may think. There are entire civilizations which are under threat. And I would like to say it here at the headquarters of UNESCO, which is here to guard the heritage. We have the Pacific Islands, the Maldives, Bangkok, Venice, London. So many wonderful sites could disappear very soon if immediate action is not taken to stop the temperature rising and to stop sea level rising. If we do not do anything, we will have the sad privilege of being the generation that knew what had to be done and didn't do anything while there was still time to act, because we know that the planet is at the beginning of a long decline. And if there is not widespread action, then movements that started up decades ago can simply destroy the wonderful diversity we have and could endanger the ecosystems and all the different species after going through all sorts of convulsions, tumults, cataclysms, or even devastating epidemics, which of course will strike the weakest and most vulnerable societies in the world. We know what responsibility human beings have in this. We must appeal to reason, to science and research, and find a new awareness. We have a new awareness of what impact we are having, the extraordinary impact we have had, and we also know what tools we can use to deal with these devastating consequences. And you, researchers from around the world, and particularly the members of the IPCC, you started raising awareness on this, started issuing warnings to what was happening with climate change, and you started on a long path to get people realizing the human sources of these disturbances and to see what actions could be done by each and every one of us. And you have persevered on this difficult path. There have been 5 decisive reports, there have been controversies, there have been disappointments, and there have also been brilliant victories. And the victories are quite simply the victories of truth. Thanks to you now, we can say that we know. We know that over the last 40 years that combustion of fossil energy and industrial processes have caused some 80% of the increases in greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that we can have resilient societies with a low carbon footprint, but this is an ambitious approach and we need great efforts from all countries in the world. Now, to combat these changes, we also realize that there are 2 key levers for action. One is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the other is to change the behavior patterns of human society to reduce the impact on climate change. We know all this, so we must take action. And you, again, are here. You have come from around the world with your scientific knowledge and your technical skills to find sustainable responses to these challenges. And of course, to do this, you have often faced many risks, physical risks, in dealing with these climate challenges. And of course, we could see many examples, but for example, there are the glaciologists, and they do their explorations and investigations, which give us so much knowledge of the past, which we need so that we can take action for the future. You can have the core samples taken at -50°C, so that you can find yet a deeper layer of glass, yet an older layer of glass. The cold weather conditions, the loneliness, often the equipment breaks down in the middle of nowhere and has to be repaired by the scientists. And sometimes there's a wonderful discovery which may change the course of science. And then after long months, then the new team comes in and the scientists go back to their home countries, to their home labs, to their families, and they enjoy the pleasure of coming back and finding their colleagues, their friends and family. And sometimes there's nostalgic longing for the time they spent in the cold, difficult conditions serving human progress. It's a bit like Marie Curie, who gave her life to advance knowledge of radium. You too brave this suffering so that the human race can move ahead and find salvation. And you too, yesterday, today, and in the future, can help us make our changes in our lives so that we can make the right decisions and changes in the interests of climate. And I would like to thank you for all this. We would like to express our gratitude. I would like to express my gratitude. Thanks to you, no one today can seriously question the role of human beings in climate change or human ability to control it. This is a huge change, and this gives us confidence for moving ahead to the COP21 conference. We are determined. You can rely on France's determination, given the difficult negotiations which will happen with 96 countries. And political action must now take your scientific discoveries and turn them into political decisions. We must find an agreement, and the negotiations have to be prepared as best as possible so that they can follow through. And you know that my country will support you here, as does the President of the Republic, who travels around the world, raising awareness, rallying people, speaking to people who are disturbed, sometimes speaking for people who are impacted by this, as he did in Manila earlier this year. And it's the entire civil society that must rally to the cause as well, so that the human race faces up to its responsibility in climate. And my colleague Ségolène will speak on this in a moment. But I would like to say that as Minister of National Education, I shall be involved in this and fully involved in this. We have 12.5 million students, 2.5 million tertiary students, and they are particularly interested in this issue, and they too will be rallying to the cause with you. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, politics has a key role to play so that we can gain from recent progress made by science. It's going to be a difficult task, and to tackle it we must be ambitious, brave and united. And this morning I have the impression that we are, and I would like to thank you.
Un grand merci, Madame le Ministre.
I'd like to thank you, Madam Minister. And I'm particularly impressed that you've mentioned the adventure of the glaciologists, which I'd like to invite you to share. Claude Lorius is the hero of the film Ice and Earth. And Hugues Jacquet has made this film. It will be released on 21st of October in France and abroad as well. So I'd really like to invite you to go and watch this film. Thank you very much, Minister, for having mentioned this. Minister of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy. We know how interested you are in climate, for which I'd like to thank you. I've heard you mentioning the term climate minister. I hope I'm not wrong. We know how hard you've worked in preparing the Paris conference. And again, I would like to thank you for this. Good morning to all. Dear Najat, Director General of UNESCO. Once again, I'd like to thank UNESCO for welcoming those, for hosting those major events for the preparation of COP21. Dear Michel Jarraud, and of course I would like to warmly thank Hervé, Treu and Jouzel. It's a delight to see so many participants here today. This is a wonderful reward for them because they have worked so hard to prepare this international scientific conference, which is a turning point in the preparation of COP21. I would also like to greet UNESCO ambassadors, researchers who have come from all over the world, teachers from all disciplines, heads of organizations that contribute to the knowledge and action. I'd like to particularly thank Laurence Toubiana, who's a climate ambassador, as well as Gilles Boeuf, Marie-Hélène Aubert. I cannot thank every single person involved, but I would like to say, and in fact the message of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon shows how mobilized the global world community is on issues pertaining to climate change and how essential it is. Just a few weeks away from the Paris Climate Conference. First of all, because it is based on the wonderful work that was carried out since 1988 by the IPCC, which is a unique network of expertise. So I'd like to thank again Hervé Treu and Jean Jouzel and all of those who work on the IPCC. This conference is, first of all, a hallmark of the scientific excellence of speakers from all over the world. This is a unique, unprecedented event when you see the quality of debates. You've also been overwhelmed by submissions and participants for this event. There's also a very broad range of partners, a very broad range of disciplines that are there to look upon all the different dimensions of the climate system, climate change and its impact. But this conference is also there to debate the mitigation and adaptation solutions that are already put in practice in many territories and that lead the way and shows the way that should be followed on a broader scale. This is exactly the way that all countries should go, because if we all decide in December to set ambitious objectives and to give ourselves a means to reach those objectives, then we will succeed. This meeting, this event, is a key event in the preparation of the Paris Climate Summit, because without this conference there wouldn't be a climate conference, there wouldn't be a framework United Nations conference from Rio, there would be no Kyoto Protocol in 1997, there wouldn't have been we wouldn't have won the battle of ideas against climate change deniers, those who denied the role played by greenhouse gas emissions and human activity. This really shows that knowledge is power. And today we have this knowledge thanks to you, thanks to scientists from all over the world. We know that it's thanks to you that we have the knowledge that allows us to understand and that pushes us towards action. You have been responsible for giving us this objective knowledge. And you have taught us that the atmosphere has a memory and that we cannot let warming speed up, a warming that took place at the end of the last age. This cannot happen on a very fast scale without major consequences. If this happens, this will endanger life itself. Environmentalists are here, climatologists, biologists, oceanographers, economists, anthropologists, doctors, legal experts, sociologists, historians, physics, chemistry, geographers, all disciplines are represented here at this conference. And you have taught us that we are both stakeholders and we are also the receiving end of what is happening now. You've taught us that climate and biodiversity are tightly linked and that resistance to that biodiversity is an indicator, a very reliable indicator of what goes wrong with climate. As Najat was saying, glaciologists looked at ice caps and the air that was trapped in the ice cap, and that enabled us to place current climate change within the context of a long-term change. It also enabled us to anticipate future variations. Paleoclimatologists have noticed the following thing. Greenhouse gas concentrations that can be attributed to the industrial era have, in a very short frame of time, reached unprecedented levels, unprecedented in the past 800,000 years. And this acceleration and intensification exceeds the ability of a biosphere to deal with it and to self-regenerate. Marine biologists and oceanographers have shown us that if the oceans have been able to temper climate change, this was at the cost of a major and growing alteration of their chemical and physical makeup. We're now at a tipping point where acidification is destroying marine biodiversity and its ecosystems. Even though we do rely on their services, thermal expansion results in sea level rise that threatens small island states and coastal areas throughout the world. The ocean is responsible for climate regulation, and today it can suffer from climate change, and it can even amplify climate change. Economists have computed the cost of inaction, and they have noticed that extreme weather events are becoming more intense, more frequent, more destructive, with droughts in Africa, California, devastating floods, cyclones, typhoons, storms from east to west and north to south. And climate change also has a financial impact. Economists show us that acting to support the climate, investing in energy transition and in green growth can be a source of renewed prosperity, of innovation based on scientific discovery. It can create jobs and sustainable jobs in poor countries where climate insecurity is a hindrance to development. Businesses and investors understand this more and more. The Climate and Business Summit and Finance Day that were hosted here have showed that the decarbonation of wallets, of money, is on the way, of finances. Researchers and engineers have understood that these sentinels of climate, such as those from the CNES that observe climate change, whose data enable us to better understand modelization of the Earth's radiation, and to understand the connection between the Earth's radiation and the ocean, to understand what happens in the higher reaches of the atmosphere and how this has an impact on the melting of the ice cap. Anthropologists, philosophers, sociologists, and historians have understood that there isn't a disconnect between nature and society. In the past, human history was considered as an emancipation from nature. But now we understand that our environment is not just an externality. We understand that it's important to have close ties with nature and to set up new development models. All scientific disciplines are helping us better to understand climate change and better to assess their current and future risks, to better identify the most efficient ways of dealing with it. I'd like to thank researchers from natural science and social researchers as well, who are gathered here today and who are helping us to change our outlook and the way in which we do things. Their work is really helping us to innovate. Now we must win the battle for action, since we have won the battle of ideas. There are still a few climate deniers here and there, but in December and beyond we must win the battle for action, which is a matter of having a shared political will. we have reached a universal and legally binding agreement that is made to last, that can be regularly revised and updated through national contributions. We now have 43, including the one from the European Union, which is one of the strongest. Thanks to the initiative of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and thanks to an event which will take place in September, we have an ability to speed up the movement towards this universal and legally binding agreement. And this conference is going to be a basis to speed up the decisions that will take place in New York in September and to prepare the Paris Climate Conference. National contributions are going to have to speed up to that we can stay by the 2 degrees objective. We are going to have to put the financial means at our disposal. With $100 billion from the Green Fund, we are going to have to redirect financial funds, both public and private, towards a low-carbon economy, and we are going to have to set up an agenda of solutions with citizens, companies and territories. It's very important to have strict, clear rules that everybody agrees to, because they are fair. There can't be any climate efficiency without social and climatic justice. This is a shared yet differentiated responsibility that takes into account the situations, the different situations and expectations of all and sundry. From energy efficiency to renewable energies, clean transport, circular economy, positive energy building, sustainable cities, green chemistry, smart networks, biosourced materials and intermittent energy storage, carbon capture, and many, many other things. This is a huge field which the fight against climate change is opening up to the knowledge and the imagination of scientists, industry, services. And so we have to find a way of putting these innovations into practice in the most democratic way possible. It is also the way towards more hope for our citizens, more hope towards employment and better quality of life for all. The 5th evaluation report of IPCC gives us a way of acting. It is a strong basis, a strong support to act in the short and the long term. And it shows that interactions that are underway call upon sectoral and cross-cutting policies. It assesses instruments that are available to mitigate climate change and protect ourselves against its current impacts. Currently, no region escapes the impact of climate change. However, its impact is not the same for every region. It updates the current state of knowledge and develops different scenarios, taking into account the current knowledge and accumulated knowledge and the current assumptions in the wider context of global changes. It also underscores the role of regions and cities that are responsible for 70% of greenhouse gas emissions and which will be home to more than 2/3 of the global population by 2050. It also provides us information that can be used as guidelines for action. Research hasn't stopped progressing and advancing. And this is the whole point of this scientific conference. Now, the question is not whether we should ask, but how we should ask. What operational solutions do we have to fight climate change and its immediate and future consequences? What advantages can we use, can we derive from this today and tomorrow in our territories and in our countries and on a global scale? How can we choose a low-carbon society and a low-carbon economy, not as a constraint, not as an unreachable objective, or not as a disaster? On the contrary, it is an opportunity that we have to seize. It is a movement that we have to speed up. all of these questions and more are at the core of the debates that you are going to hold, and they are also at the core of the preparation of the next climate summit.
Now, I would just like to make 3 comments in conclusion. You are in France, and France is a country that wanted to be exemplary to deserve the honor it has of hosting the conference, as the President of the Republic wanted to have it. So we are enforcing in France what we are recommending on an international scale. Our Parliament is currently passing legislation on energy transition for green growth and a law on saving biodiversity, nature and landscapes. But there are also all the different action plans that go with them. There's one on what we call positive energy territories, positive for energy and climate. We have plans for energy efficiency and energy savings, for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We're organizing a change to our energy model. We're preparing for the age without oil, after oil. We're increasing renewable energy. We're developing clean transport and the so-called circular economy. We're protecting our biodiversity and gaining from it too. We want a fair share and fair sharing of the advantages which have been gained. And there is the principle of ecological solidarity, which I have put in the legislation on saving biodiversity, nature and landscapes. This is proactive legislation, and it is a concrete contribution to the international support and movement which is needed. The second comment I would like to make is the importance of this conference, and once again I would like to stress the importance of researchers and their role, because if we did not have the contribution of science, we would still not know that climate is a system. We may notice that 1 or 2 things have changed. There's a heat wave, for example, in France at the moment. We may see climate having an impact on certain activities. For example, the wine growers who see that the grapes aren't maturing as they did before, that the earth is not as rich as it used to be, or the people who live in the Aveyron region, we saw them last year, who've seen the increase in the number of lightning strikes related to the increase in temperature and an increase in the violence of the storms. But we also see the impact on island states, and there was the Barnier appeal which the head of state launched, and there's the appeal from the Caribbean with leaders from that part of the world, because these events, if you don't see them in an overall vision as part of an entire situation which is changing, then they will just become points of local knowledge. They will not have their full meaning, because they're only fully meaningful when you see them in relation to one another, and that's what's new. We need to link things together when they don't appear to be linked, and this is the role of science, this is the role of researchers. You will say, of course, that climate phenomena are complex, and they are in the etymological sense of the word. As Edouard Morin said, it means weaving together. So understanding these events for us as political decision makers means we're going to act. It means we're going to see them in a long timeline. We see climate changes and social changes, and then we have to combine them with urgent pressures, have different angles and different interdisciplinary approaches. And the organizers of this conference, of course, are attached to that approach, as we can see with the wide range of speakers over the 4-day program here. This is essential when you look at climate and biodiversity. So I'd like to say thank you to the IPCC, thank you to you all. Thank you for providing us, the political decision makers and all citizens, who are seeing links between local and global levels, different companies and different regions. Thank you for providing us with reports on a regular basis, which are updates with all the available knowledge, so that each and every one of us can realize what's going on and face up to the responsibilities we must take. It's not a question of having turnkey recommendations, but you need to have the input required so that you can make enlightened and properly informed decisions. We are counting on you coming up with work for us here at your conference, so that you can get the vitality and creativity that comes from the scientific community to the political world, so that we can get to a greater level of awareness, a planetary level of awareness, a new awareness. The citizens of our countries are in their different regions, different areas, but we're all citizens of the world, and there is dialogue and cooperation between us all. we are sure that your conference is going to be of special importance preparing for the COP21 conference, because we can see that things are speeding up, things are moving ahead. The Ministry of Ecology, Sustainable Development, Energy, and is responsible for climate change and the seas, and the Ministry of Education, Research and Higher Education with Najat Vallaud-Belkacem is involved with other partners, and I would like to applaud them all because they're all essential in the inputs they provided. We have the ADEME, which is the Agency for the Environment and Energy Control, which is organizing a session on innovative technology on the international level. We have the General Commission for Sustainable Development, which has 2 parallel sessions. One is on the European program, Copernicus, which is observing the Earth, and the other is on joint production of knowledge, working on the basis of examples from different countries. In fact, I've asked all my staff to leave their offices, to leave their files behind and come here and listen to you, because this is a unique opportunity for them to hear the work which is done by researchers from around the world, because you are here speaking to the rest of the planet over 4 days. Obviously, I'm not going to give advice to researchers, but I would like to express an ambition or a wish. I would like you to be heard as you deserve to be heard, and for you to have the impact on the preparation of the COP21 conference, because your words and your messages must be clear. There must not be too many diplomatic precautions. This is the prerogative of scientists. You are free in your thoughts. You are free to debate ideas. You have to provide proof and evidence, but you don't have to hide behind euphemisms. In these times of crises, when we have difficulties to overcome, which are facing the entire world and which requires worldwide governance to move ahead to deal with terrorism, migration, the financial system, and so on, I think that in such a context, the climate question is, above all issues, the one which is likely to move ahead in this field of worldwide governance. Because if we're going to find one area which is obviously in need of interdependence, where there is not going to be one party winning, doesn't matter how wary or powerful that party could be, it is indeed that area of climate change. I would say the pressure of climate is an opportunity. I would even say it's an historic opportunity, but perhaps that's a bit of a cliche, so I won't say that. Okay, it's a joint responsibility, but we're going to have different ways of enforcing and applying things. The question of climate can be at the forefront of building this multiple universe, this concrete universe of multiple parties, as Mireille Delmas-Marty, the French philosopher, says. And, of course, we need to have a uniform approach so that we can have keys to this common world that you're looking at. I wish you the very best with your work. Unfortunately, I can't attend all your sessions, but I'm going to follow you. And if I'm free, if we manage to get the legislation on energy transition, green growth and climate through the Senate, I will come and listen to you on Friday with great interest with Laurent Fabius, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We'll listen to the conclusions of this fine meeting you have here, and I'm sure the findings will help as around the world, help those in charge of organizing the COP21 conference to take on the task they have to deal with and move ahead as quickly as possible, and as we all wish to move ahead as fast as possible to accelerate the ecological revolution, as the Pope said in his encyclical. We have been and we must be up to the level where we can take on the challenges of climate change in the time which we have available to us. We must, in a reversible time, deal with the irreversible situation, particularly for the poorest, the weakest. We must be up to the level of the creation of our community of destiny and our shared future, which we have devised in our mind, which we are inventing, and which we must now achieve. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. That was a very relevant reminder to point out that scientists' primary role is to provide the political decision makers with the input they need to make their decisions. And that is indeed our first objective. And you asked us to be ambitious, And I think that I can say that many of the scientists here would agree with you. We hope that the Paris COP21 conference is a great success. It's a long path, and I'm sure that the scientific community will contribute to that. And I would like to thank all the political decision makers, all the politicians who are dealing with the climate change for the efforts you've made. You are one of them, and it's very important for us, for the scientific community, to have your support. So thank you one and all. I would like to thank you all. We shall resume at 11 o'clock. We're going to have a plenary session here in this auditorium. So thank you, ministers. Thank you to the other speakers. Thank you, Michel. Thank you, Hervé, who is our head organizer. Thank you, all of you.